The recent history of Planet 4546b has been quite eventful. Between three prominent shipwrecks, many have tried and failed to survive in this unforgiving world. Yet one woman would defy all the odds, facing down every foe this world could throw at her, and emerging on top. That woman is Marguerit Maida. Marguerite's thirst for adventure had been present for most of her life. She was born in the Mongolian Independent States, a small transgov that specialized in the exportation of raw materials. She wouldn't stick around for long, however, leaving home at the age of 16 to pursue various mercenary jobs. During this time, Marguerite began to develop her skills, becoming rather adept at survival and combat. Her skills became so good that she began to make a bit of a name for herself, and was eventually recruited by the Trans-System Federation. As she had done as a privateer, Marguerite's invaluable skill set allowed her to have a successful career in the TSF for many years. Everything was going great until a seemingly routine reconnaissance mission. For reasons that are unclear, Marguerite single-handedly eliminated the local security team over the course of 3 days. For this act, Marguerite was dishonorably discharged from the TSF at the age of 37. While this should have been a major setback, Marguerite simply went back to being a mercenary, doing so without incident for the next 5 years. Back in the Mongolian states, a man named Paul Torgal was preparing to accompany his son through Federation space. The mission was simple enough, requiring a crew of just 5, but Paul had one problem. While the odds of being attacked by pirates in this part of space were low, traveling completely unprotected on such a small vessel would still be unwise. Paul decided to hire a mercenary, and Marguerite soon became the 6th member of the Degassi mission. For a while, all was well. The mission was going according to plan, and it seemed Marguerite's skills would not be needed. But this was about to change. It began with what was supposed to be a simple pass through the 4546 star system, when the ship's captain, Paul Torgal, noticed something unusual. It was planet 4546b. What caught Paul's attention wasn't the planet's Earth-like size, or its 2 moons, but the presence of liquid water. Planets of this type are quite rare throughout space, but present prime candidates to hold alien life. For Paul, a man who was already known for his risk-taking, the opportunity was too good to miss. On his orders, the Degassi would make a brief detour, heading towards what he believed to be an untouched ocean world. But as we now know, 4546b was far from untouched. The outbreak of a deadly bacterium had forced the planet under quarantine, and a massive weapon had been installed to prevent anyone from entering or leaving. The Quarantine Enforcement Platform, as it was named, had actually shot down a freighter a few decades prior, but of course this wasn't known at the time. And as the Degassi came within range, the enforcement platform opened fire. In an instant, the laser tore through the Degassi, sending it careening into the ocean far below. Once the dust had settled, Marguerite took stock of their situation. The Degassi was damaged beyond repair and their communications were destroyed. But worst of all, 3 people, half of the ship's entire crew, were dead. After grabbing what she could, Marguerite climbed into a life pod with Paul and his son Bart, the only other survivors. For days, the group drifted, rain hammering on the life pod, not knowing when or if their miserable ride would ever end. Finally, the weather cleared and the group washed up on a small island. As Paul figured out what to do next, Marguerite went out to salvage what she could from the Degassi. Of her spoils included titanium and glass, which the group used to construct a rudimentary base. It was small, but it was their home, at least for now. With no immediate objectives, the group began to settle into their new lives. However, as the days turned to weeks, Marguerite began to worry about their situation. While the weather was clear for now, Marguerite feared the torrential rains would return. They were already barely growing enough food as is, and a large flood could easily destroy their crops. If that happened, they were as good as dead. Wishing to avert a potential crisis, Marguerite complained to Paul, telling him there was no use in hiding and that sooner or later they'd have to get their feet wet. Unfortunately, Paul wasn't convinced. While he was a risk-taker, this was more so in the business sense. He still believed rescue was coming and didn't want to forfeit emergency payments by taking unnecessary risk. And as much as Marguerite didn't like Paul's decision, he was still the captain, so there wasn't really much she could do about it. However, she did score a slight victory. Paul allowed her to construct a farm on the island's eastern side. Still, she knew that in the event of a large flood, this wasn't going to cut it, so she began to scout for a new base location. Finally, after just over 6 weeks on the floating island, Marguerite's fears were confirmed. What started out as a light drizzle quickly transitioned into a full-on downpour. The survivors were forced inside, and with no one to tend to them, the grow beds began to flood. Marguerite eventually managed to convince Paul to let Bart deal with the plants, but at this point, she knew they were only delaying the inevitable.
Son, I said wait for the storm to pass. Your life's more valuable to me than a plant patch.
You stopped being in charge when the ship you were captaining sunk.
I'll stop being in charge when you take charge of yourself.
Say, Chief. Chief!
What?
You know how to drain those grow beds of 40 tons of stormwater? Or how to conjure food from the air?
I know how to prioritize.
I'm just saying, if that's so, what's your boy's life worth to you today? If tomorrow you're gonna be so hungry you start wondering what he tastes like, let him go deal with the plants.
Son, go deal with the plants.
Bart, Torgal has disembarked the habitat.
Interfere with my family again, and when rescue arrives, I will leave you here. Do you understand me?
No rescue coming, Chief. Not in time. And no staying here neither. This rain keeps falling, sooner or later this place will be buried. Only choice we got is whether to get buried with it.
Not long after this message, things got even worse. Marguerite and the others awoke to the sound of tearing metal as the saturated earth gave way, sending a hell of rock and dirt careening into their base. By some miracle, no one was hurt, but the base was a total loss. This forced everyone to move to one of the small mountaintop observatories. The time spent here was miserable. The observatory was cramped and food was running dangerously low. This was the last straw for Marguerite. She had to convince Paul to let them leave.
You see, Chief, you brought us to this sodden planet. Told us we'd see a lush payday. Now what do we got some 6 weeks later? A dead crew, a habitat that's half buried, food washed away.
I suppose the executive decisions would be better left to someone with your extensive experience of hitting people in the face.
I know enough not to take unscheduled detours to uncharted planets. That's something you don't want to learn the hard way.
Easy to judge a decision in hindsight. Harder to come up with a plan of your own.
Got one already. We take what we can carry and hunker down in a cave somewhere. I scouted a site, a couple 100 meters deep, lots of metal deposits.
How do you imagine we'd live?
With ready access to building materials, like damn queens, a couple of water filters, a bioreactor, fresh fish. But Chief, we'll eat seaweed salad and drink our own urine if that's what it takes. All that matters is, do you got something better?
Send the coordinates to my PDA. I'll review your proposal.
After everything that happened, Paul finally relented. The group packed up some essentials before bidding the island farewell. Marguerite then guided the group to the entrance of the Jellyshroom Caves. A few hours later, and they had themselves a brand new base. For a while, the trio lived in relative harmony. The fighting between Marguerite and Paul had subsided, at least for now, and she had even begun helping Bart with his research. One day, Bart was performing environmental scans when he noticed something unusual. Deep within a cave to their south was a structure that appeared unnatural. To Marguerite, this find was particularly interesting. Back on the floating island, Marguerite had discovered a mysterious artifact, but before the group had a chance to investigate, it was completely buried in the landslide. This new discovery raised more questions than answers. Were the object and the mysterious structure related? Could this have anything to do with whatever shot down the Degassi? And if it did, what was to stop whatever shot them down from shooting down their rescue ship? In an instant, Marguerite realized they had to go deeper. They had to investigate this structure if they wanted any hope of getting rescued. It also became clear they couldn't stay in the cave either. Maybe due to the observatory, rushed construction, or just a fluke in the design, their base had begun to leak. While slow at first, the flood had grown worse with each passing day. So, as she had done a few weeks prior, Marguerite began looking for a new place to live. She eventually decided on a cave not far from Bart's discovery. Now all that was left to do was gather supplies and convince Paul to let them build a base 500 meters down.
We're already 200 meters below sea level. You want to go deeper?
Look around us, Chief. Water leaking through the hull, water outside the hatch. We're drowning real slow. If rescue arrives, whatever shot us down, it's gonna do it again and again until it's shut off. You see an off switch around here, Chief?
Why would it any more likely be half a kilometer down?
Your kid found something on the scanner. There's something down there. Something that shouldn't be.
You're mad.
I'm going all the same, and I have an idea you two are gonna follow. But if you do, be mindful. Your authority stopped at sea level.
With no luck convincing Paul, Marguerite decided to go forward with the preparations anyway. She knew where she needed to go, and while she didn't want to leave the others behind, it was a sacrifice she was willing to make.
These conniving corporate bourgeois, inbred, incompetent, self-absorbed jerks don't have a damn clue. The kid's not so bad. He's even useful. But I swear, everything that comes out of his father's idiot face is a narcissistic lie. He wants to stay in this cave, his problem. I'm the one doing the heavy lifting. When sea monsters are hunting you, you don't hide. You hunt the sea monsters. Then you build a bigger boat out of sea monster bones and you hunt bigger monsters. Keep going until there aren't any monsters left to hunt you. I'm going deeper. I'm gonna find what shot us down and I'm gonna tear its damn heart out. I've started the prep work. The kids taught me how to make enameled glass. I've started stockpiling metal ores to build myself a sea moth. I'll raid the indoor grow beds before I leave.
Fortunately, this never happened. After some internal deliberation, Paul realized their hopes of rescue were slim to none if they stayed in the cave. Somewhat begrudgingly, he allowed the plan, and the trio set out once more. Perched on a large plateau, the group's third base was the most ambitious by far. With an alien containment, lab equipment, and ample cargo space, it was a true underwater laboratory. With the unknown structure only a stone's throw away, Marguerite wanted to begin investigating as soon as possible. However, life was about to throw yet another wrench into her plans.
Please, stop fighting and listen. We're sick.
What?
How?
You've been coughing, right? Feeling itchy? Blisters?
Yeah.
The biometrics would have warned us if we were sick.
It's something new. It's not in the database.
Come on, then, what's it gonna do? Turn us inside out? Dissolve us into jelly?
It's an alien bacteria. It's everywhere. Every organism on this planet. It's altering our genetic code.
How are the creatures surviving if they're infected?
I don't know yet.
Want me to cut some of them open for you? Find out what makes them tick?
No.
Just tell me what you need, son. Materials, equipment.
Just... Can I have some quiet? I need some time to think.
Unbeknownst to the trio, as soon as they left the life pod, they had become infected with a deadly bacterium. While the Kra had been delayed as the group consumed fish laced with the enzyme 42, the bacterium was beginning to take hold. Almost immediately, Marguerite's plans were pushed aside, as all efforts were directed at finding a cure. Since every organism on the planet was infected, Marguerite decided to use her skills to her advantage, going out and killing specimens for Bart to study. Things were going fine until one of her test subjects got a little too big.
Marguerit Maida has boarded the habitat.
What are you so happy about, Maida?
Say, kid, I brought you something.
Is that a Leviathan outside?
Towed it home on the back of the sub.
You killed that thing?
It's still breathing. I was about to finish the job, but I can stay and chat if you'd like. No? Then make yourself useful and pass me that hardened blade.
Are you out of your mind? You brought that thing here? What if it's not as dead as it looks? What if others come?
You prefer it got curious and came of its own accord, or got messed up and dragged here?
When we get off this planet, I am going to drag you through every court in the damn Federation.
While on a trip to the dunes, Marguerite managed to injure a Reaper Leviathan. However, the scrum caught the attention of a second Reaper. Unknown to Marguerite, the stealthy predator began trailing her as she towed the first Reaper back to base. With its target in sight, the Reaper began its attack.
I have had it with you, risking our lives.
Oh, stow it, Chief. The kid can't kill this disease without fish to study. I'm just bringing him home.
But tell her. Tell her I'm right.
You're both wrong. Marguerite, I can't find out how they resist the bacteria if you slaughter them all.
It ain't always they oblige in coming in alive.
He means you're being reckless.
Father, the outcome's no better if we hole up in here and don't go outside. Look, we have to find a middle way.
There is no compromise. Not while she's on my sea base.
Your sea base?
I'm going outside.
Bart, Torgal has disembarked the habitat.
Bart, come in. It's dangerous. Damn it, boy. I know you can hear me.
Chief, get off the radio and put on your helmet.
What?
Brace!
In an instant, a large piece of the base was torn apart, sending a cascade of water into the titanium hulls. Marguerite, Paul, and Bart were all thrown from the habitat, but while Bart managed to swim clear, Paul and Marguerite were not so lucky. The beast let out a roar and began to zero in on Paul, but just when it came within reach, Marguerite attacked. Perhaps feeling at least partially guilty for what just happened, or simply not wanting to go down without a fight, she clung to the Reaper, stabbing at it with a piece of scrap metal. In one final act as the Degassi's mercenary, she protected her crew, buying Paul and Bart precious time to escape. However, this would come at a price. The Reaper began to dive, pulling Marguerite out towards the void, never to see Paul or Bart again. And for the next 12 years, this was where we thought Marguerite met her end. Official databases, future survivors, and even her former crew had written her off as dead. She was dragged into the abyss by a beast nearly twice the size of a blue whale. Most people would never hope to survive such an encounter. But Marguerite Maida wasn't most people.
There I was, 500 meters below sea level. Chunks of the sea base sank around me. One hand gripped the monster's scales. The other was clamped around the shard of metal I'd lodged into her eye socket. A Reaper. Wounded, maybe, but still deadly. I'd already taken out one eye. I'd damn near carved out the other. We were headed for the void at the crater's edge. Blinded, she was spiraling deeper. I had a choice. Hold on, or let go. I clung for dear life as she took us deeper. I had 1 minute of air in the tank. Back then, I could go another 3 with what I had in my lungs. So I had 4 minutes to kill the Reaper, minus a few to get back to the surface. It ain't that I like killing folk. It's just sometimes what you need is on the inside of someone else's ribcage. I killed that beautiful, terrifying creature, and I made for the surface. When I caught my breath, I realized we'd come further than I'd thought. I was surrounded by watery void, just me and ocean. Nothing else.
In the span of just a few minutes, Marguerite had gone from sitting in a sea base to floating out in the unknown. It was through sheer force of will that she had even made it to this point, but she was going to need more than that to survive now. Fortunately, whether she knew it or not, she'd just gotten very lucky. In its attempts to thrash her off, the Reaper had swam into the void, but had actually managed to swim past the territory of the ghost leviathans. Had Marguerite killed the Reaper any later, she would have likely drowned, but had she killed it much sooner, she would have almost certainly died to the ghost leviathans. Even still, the situation was far from ideal. Alone in the abyss with minimal equipment, she'd die of exhaustion eventually. But once again, fate had other plans.
That far out to sea, swimming back for land wasn't an option. I'd die from exhaustion long before I made it to shore. All I could do was survive long enough to wash up somewhere. I felt a suction, and suddenly, there were vast jaws rising out of the water towards me. It had taken hours for the Reaper's corpse to float to the surface. Using the knife, I clambered up her flank and got a perch on top. I figured she'd float for a few days at least, enough for me to catch my breath. But would she sink before or after I died of thirst? I had a knife, a repair tool, and 3 liters of water. At least I wasn't going to die of exhaustion. Now, those Reapers, they're practically all muscle, but there's some fat in there. I was able to keep warm and drink the water. And I didn't have much, but I had that repair tool, so I had a spark. It took a week to light that first fire. And I know more about the burning properties of Reaper fat than I ever cared to. I had to ration fires, but as they burned, I could smoke meat that I carved out of the beast's ribcage.
With temporary sources of food and shelter procured, there was nothing for Marguerite to do but wait as she drifted through the void. But as the days turned to weeks, a new problem began to arise. Although she was past the ghost leviathans, the void was still home to billions of microorganisms that began consuming the Reaper. Slowly but surely, the flesh began to rot, as the Reaper sank lower with each passing day. Despite all of this, Marguerite still had a slim ray of hope. As she drifted, the air and water around her grew cold and began to freeze. She was definitely going somewhere, but would she find salvation before or after it was too late?
A fortnight into our voyage, I was more or less living inside the creature's ribcage. It meant shelter, and it meant food. The flesh was starting to rot. The stench was unlike anything I'd ever smelled. As we floated, the temperature dropped, and the rotten meat began to stiffen and freeze. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the Reaper began to lose buoyancy. We sank a little each day. My sanctuary was becoming my tomb, and I was at the mercy of the current and the winds. Until one day, I saw a smattering of penguins in the distance. Swimming birds usually mean solid land of some kind. I was lucky. The winds followed their path. Hours later, I saw a blessed sight. An unmoving cloud sitting upon the water. Land. It renewed my spirit as I watched the land get closer and closer. The Reaper slowly sank, but I was no longer worried. When the Reaper finally sank below the water, I was close enough to lazily swim my way to shore. I made a note to come back for the Reaper's skull. I didn't ride the beast for 3 weeks to have no proof. Land never felt so good, even in this Arctic hell.
As Marguerite climbed onto the icy shores of Sector Zero, the sense of relief must have been overwhelming. Against all odds, she had ridden the Reaper's corpse halfway across the planet and lived to tell the tale. As for her time in Sector Zero, the finer details are less clear, but we can still piece together what happened next. Marguerite likely spent the next few days exploring the sector's glacial interior. The plants provided plentiful food, while small caves were a source of warmth and shelter. The only problem was a lack of resources. This eventually drove Marguerite back to the ocean, just as she had done on the floating island a few months prior. From here, it's likely she gathered resources from the twisty bridges before heading eastward in search of somewhere to live. She spent a night in the Delta Island, enjoying the hot springs and collecting some more food, before making her way out to the Lily Pad Islands. It was here that she built her current base, consisting of multiple large rooms and a moon pool. Around this time, she also constructed a prawn suit and began using it to explore the sector. During one of these trips, Marguerite somehow managed to tame a snow stalker. She named it Preston and eventually brought it back to her sea base. However, the most notable of her excursions would come a while later, when she battled a chelicerae. The creature put up a good fight, but in the end, Marguerite came out on top. She took the creature back to her base, preserving the meat and using the bones in everything from furniture to vehicle upgrades. After a while, though, she realized she was going to need more than just fish if she wanted to stay healthy. It wouldn't be practical to travel all the way back to the glaciers anytime she wanted food, so Marguerite decided to build a greenhouse on a nearby iceberg. She wasn't the best gardener, but with enough time and persistence, her hard work eventually paid off.
Alright, Marge, old girl. We hate this greenhouse, so here are some pointers to remember so we never have to do the worst parts again. Too bad you can't fight malnutrition by hunting it down and killing it. So, first thing, insulation. First few nights the soil was rock solid. Ended up having to insulate the damn place with dehydrated kelp. Adding a thermal mass helped too. Heat from barrels of water. Probably should have just eaten the damned kelp. But nope, my body was craving a salad. Wish I was just made of exosuit. Next, grow lights were a must-have. Gotta admit, I felt pretty proud of my first full crop of lettuce. Fed half of it to Preston. That snowstalker will eat practically anything. Always spits half of it out, though. Another thing we have in common. The slobbery green mess makes good compost.
At this point, Marguerite's work was mostly done. She had a base, a stable source of food, and even a furry companion to keep her company. As the months turned to years, she began to settle into her new routine of hunting, exploring, and just generally living life. It must have seemed as though she'd be alone on the planet forever. With the events of the Degassi crash feeling like a lifetime ago, it would have been easy for Marguerite to assume that they had been forgotten, presumed dead, or the big transgovs didn't care enough to look for them anyway. But as it turns out, they weren't as forgotten as she might have thought. Back in Federation space, the Altera transgov was preparing to send its new flagship, Aurora, out to the Adrian Arm. While the ship's primary mission was to construct a phase gate, she was also home to a Mongolian emissary. Unknown to most of the crew, the Aurora had an auxiliary mission to investigate the Degassi's disappearance. As the Aurora initiated its slingshot maneuver around 4546b, it was struck by the quarantine enforcement platform, causing it to crash into the same volcanic crater as the Degassi. While most quickly perished, one man survived, curing the Kara and managing to build a rocket to get back home. With this, he brought back knowledge of both alien technology and the Kara bacterium. Altera was eager to investigate, and it wasn't long before equipment and personnel began landing on Sector 0. To say this surprised Marguerite would be a complete understatement. Suspicious of Alterra's intentions, she initially kept her distance, not wanting herself or her base to be discovered. Her experience with the TSF came in handy, and she was able to avoid confrontation for quite some time. However, Marguerite began sabotaging and stealing equipment, which eventually drew Alterra's attention. Alterra didn't know who she was, but they began using a communications tower and spy penguins to keep an eye on her. As the activities of Alterra and Marguerite drew them closer together, it seemed a confrontation would be inevitable. The day Marguerite Maida met Samantha Ayu likely started out as any other. Samantha, or Sam as she was otherwise known, was a roboticist working on Alterra's spy penguins. The news likely displeased Marguerite, given she was one of the people being spied on, and the pair didn't trust each other at first. But as they conversed, both women realized they might have more in common with the other than they originally thought. Although Sam worked for Alterra, she had begun to grow increasingly wary of the Transgov. According to Sam, one of her colleagues had recently made an interesting discovery. A large cave containing a frozen leviathan had been found up in the glacial basin, but instead of opening it up, Alterra placed the site on high alert, patrolling the region and only allowing a few people inside. Sam was beginning to suspect that Alterra was hiding something, and was unsure of what to do. Perhaps seeing a bit of herself in the rebellious scientist, Marguerite urged Sam to keep looking for answers, and the bond between them began to grow. It wasn't long before Sam discovered the truth. The cave was home to a mutated strand of Kara, and Alterra was researching it in their underwater lab. The news alarmed Marguerite, who saw firsthand just how much damage the bacterium had caused. Sam shared her sentiment, believing that Alterra was playing with fire. Sam began to openly question the project, but all her attempts to get it cancelled resulted in failure. Eventually, Sam received a demotion, being sent to do maintenance at a remote facility far away from both the cave and the lab. It became clear that Alterra wasn't interested in changing their position. The question then became how to stop it. Even if Alterra did have good intentions, the risk of the bacterium spreading off-world was simply too great. Sam decided to synthesize an antidote, stashing it in a small cave not far from the Leviathan's site. Her plan was to eliminate the bacterium at its source, but to Marguerite, this just wasn't good enough.
I've already synthesized an antidote and stashed it in a cave. I can go grab it and...
That's your plan?
You don't think it'll work?
You're thinking too small. Like maybe if you're polite enough about destroying the bacteria, Alterra will come around and see it your way. But do you believe in yourself or not?
I think so.
You think so? Come on. Is the bacteria a threat, or isn't it?
It is.
Does it need to be dealt with or not?
It does.
So who's right on this?
I am.
Say it like you mean it.
I am.
I said like you mean it, not like you're testifying before a rigged Transgov court.
I am.
Great. Then what you gotta do is seal off the whole cave. I've got just the stuff. Made it for fishing, but it blew the whole ice shelf halfway to deep space. Vaporized all the fish.
Okay.
And you gotta hit the lab too, or there's just no point. Actually, you know what? Let me take care of that one. It'll be fun.
Perhaps out of sheer desperation, Sam decided to go along with Marguerite's plan. Shortly after this conversation, they each took some explosives and bid each other farewell. In a two-pronged attack, Sam made her way to the frozen Leviathan, while Marguerite headed down to the lab. The antidote was left in the cave, serving as a contingency plan should anything go wrong. Marguerite's part in the plan went mostly as expected, placing explosives near the heart of the lab. The resulting blast caused a fire within the lab, overheating the nuclear reactor and causing a large explosion. The laboratory was scorched beyond recognition, and water began pouring in, effectively rendering the base useless. Unfortunately, Sam wasn't so lucky. After setting up the explosives, she was caught by the cave's security guard. They were both still in the cave when the explosives went off, and were killed in the subsequent collapse. The following week saw a rapid evacuation of all Alterra personnel and crew. With the bacterium research destroyed, and a large meteor storm headed their way, there wasn't much of a point in staying. Marguerite was alone once more, but this wouldn't last very long. As the meteor storm hit, it's likely Marguerite decided to remain in the safety of her underwater base. After a while, the danger began to subside, and she was able to return to the surface. Marguerite began to focus her attention on Delta Island. While the Alterra crew were gone, they had left the communications tower online, suggesting they were still spying on her. Marguerite made several attempts to disable the tower, but was ultimately unsuccessful. It was during one of these attempts that she noticed a woman on the island shore. She instantly suspected it was Alterra, dispatching someone to re-establish their presence on the planet. Marguerite decided to issue a warning, urging whoever it was to leave right away.
This is a recorded message. If you can hear this, you're trespassing. If you know what's good for you, you'll get the hell out of here.
The stranger paused for a moment before continuing on their path, evidently undeterred. Marguerite decided she was going to need a more direct approach.
Stop right there, Alterra. You're out of bounds.
I'm not with Alterra.
Then your position is doubly precarious.
What do you mean?
If you're telling the truth, you're out of your mind. If you're lying, there'll be hell to pay.
Wait! Who are you?
Stay off my land.
Perhaps just wanting to be left alone at this point, Marguerite decided to head back home. But even this wouldn't deter the stranger. A few hours later, she had somehow managed to track Marguerite down to her base. Marguerite again told her to leave, but it seemed the stranger wasn't going to take no for an answer.
Didn't I tell you to stay away?
From what? I don't even know who you are.
Marguerite Maida's the name. You're on my turf.
Great. Can I come in and warm up?
What part of go away do you not understand, Alterra?
I'm not with Alterra.
I told you to stay off my land.
You trained that thing?
Next time I'll let him tear you to ribbons, Alterra.
I'm not with Alterra. I'm Robin Ayu. I'm looking for information about my sister Sam. I think you might have crossed paths.
Bull crap. I suggest you take the time you need to come to your senses and then get off my sea base. If you're not Alterra, why don't you disable that damn tracking satellite tower instead of barging into my sea base? Maybe once Alterra's off my back, I'll remember something about your sister. There's some junk on that table that might help. I couldn't get it to work.
The woman in question was Sam's sister, Robin Ayu. Hearing the news of her sister's death, she had snuck onto the planet to investigate what had happened. Still, Marguerite didn't entirely trust her and decided on a deal. Robin would shut down the communications tower, and in exchange, Marguerite would give her information on Sam. Robin agreed and examined the fragment on Marguerite's desk before vacating the base. Robin eventually disabled the tower, meaning Alterra could no longer spy on Marguerite. To thank her, Marguerite decided to invite Robin up to her greenhouse, where they could discuss Sam.
Yes! Satellite is down.
All right, Alterra. You win this round. Come find me at my greenhouse. I'm about 1 kilometer east of your position up on an iceberg. I have a present for you.
Robin followed the directions, eventually locating Marguerite's greenhouse. It was here that the pair would talk once more.
Damn satellite hasn't passed by in a while. I guess that was your doing.
Sam's not the only one in the family who knew what to do with vague directions and old wire.
She was an original, that sister of yours. First time I met her, I was sure she was Altera through and through. Not a crease in her uniform. Sending those damn bird bots to spy everywhere. Then, she surprised me. Maybe a little too much.
Meaning?
If you really want to know, there's a PDA on the bench that can point you in the right direction. You need anything else? Don't bother me. But you can help yourself to the greenhouse. Least I can do to repay you for getting those spine pests off my back.
The PDA in question detailed Marguerite and Sam's plan to eliminate the bacterium. With a new lead on her sister, Robin left. She would occasionally visit Marguerite in her base, but they would never have quite the same connection as Marguerite did with Sam. Eventually, Robin would finish everything she came to the planet to do. She left through an alien phase gate, leaving Marguerite alone on 4546B once more. And for now, that's where Marguerite's story ends. Through observations, databases, and personal accounts, we've been able to piece together much of her life, although some questions still remain. One of the greatest mysteries of Marguerite's life is how she survived the Kra bacterium for 10 years. I'm happy to announce I'll be doing a deep dive into that topic very soon. Until then, feel free to check out some of my other videos and consider subscribing. It helps out more than you might think. Anyways, that's all from me. I hope to see you all again soon.